Excellent. So welcome everyone to our webinar, Social Cohesion in Times of Crisis. My name is Wendy Kilgannon and I'm delighted to be joined today by our three panellists. So first up, we have Christian Hughes. Christian is a psychologist who's worked with GB Cycling, GB Rowing and England Rugby amongst others. And he's now the CEO of MyPeople Group, which is an organisation that's dedicated to monitoring and measuring the unquantifiable aspects of culture, values and relationships within commercial organisations. Then we got Will. Will Fraser joined Saracens Academy in 2005 and he was a member of the famed class of '08 alongside the likes of Owen Farrell and Jackson Ray. He made 83 appearances for Saracens and was part of the team during the 15-16 European and Premiership double season. Since he retired in 2017 following a neck injury, Will has been the director of the Saracens Way, which takes core values, winning mentality and daily processes used by the Saracens and shows that how they can be applied in business. And finally, Henry Fraser. Henry was a promising rugby player in the Saracens Academy before a single moment on holiday in Portugal in 2009 changed his life forever. Henry's background in sport instilled a ferocious competitiveness, which has allowed him to confront his paralysis. But now a successful mouth artist and motivational speaker, Henry says that being challenged in life is inevitable, but I believe that being defeated is optional. So hi guys, nice to have you all with us.
Thanks for having us.
Hello.
So just to give a bit of context for those on the webinar before we get into the kind of good bit and the chat with you three, today we're going to talk about social cohesion and the importance of relationships in times of crisis and how you can measure those relationships. Measuring relationships and social cohesion is difficult enough for managers and HR in the best of circumstances, never mind now when a large majority, if not all, of employees in some businesses are working from home. We all know that the context in the current situation means that this is necessary, but how do we manage those employees when we aren't face-to-face with them any longer? When surveyed, on the slide you can see some of the things that managers of remote workers said they were most and least concerned about. The things that they're most concerned about, as you can see, are productivity and task focus, things like reduced focus of employees, reduced productivity. They were least concerned about the people side of things around loneliness and isolation and overworking. Yet a quick scan of LinkedIn can tell you that these are the things that those employees who are now working from home all the time are worried about the most. So Christian, can you tell us a little bit more about social cohesion impacting on remote workers?
Hello everybody. So over the last month or so, there's been a big shift in the way everyone's working. I think that's pretty clear. Most of the focus of businesses and leaders has been on the physical and operational response to coronavirus, shifting teams to working from home, focus on customers, financing, cash flow, legal, HR ramifications to the change, but perhaps less focus on the psychological aspects of working from home. So if you can just move that slide on slightly there, Wendy, thank you. So one of those facets we refer to as affinity distance, and it's a concept in psychology that highlights the sense of shared values, the shared purpose, shared goals of a group of people. So when you're working from home, these elements are the bits that can be easily lost because they're often unwritten and they often are about a sense of shared purpose and a sense of shared fate, that we're all likely to experience the same thing and we're all heading in roughly the same directions. So if I just zone in on that and some of the facts around affinity distance. So when we talk about affinity distance, what you'll experience for an individual level is a sense of disconnectedness. So the people you know and work with, how well do you know them? How vocalized are your team goals? And how much do you trust each other and have a voice with each other? What can you share and can't you share? In a normal operating environment, there are plenty of moments in the day where you have a difficult call or a difficult interaction and you'll buy a coffee machine and you can download to somebody. Those opportunities don't exist very easily in a remote working environment. So in psychology, we talk quite a lot about the fact you can make relationships work with physical and operational distance as long as you have a sense of trust and shared common values. This is pretty easy to evidence in long-term relationships and long-distance relationships, but when we're thinking about it in a team environment, what we're talking about there is something we call social cohesion. So, what is social cohesion? We measure the connectedness of a community and the relationships amongst that group in the community. So what we're talking about here is where we talk about relationships, we're talking about it almost scientifically here, and from a psychological perspective, we're talking about it as the emotional scaffolding of the group, the social connectedness, how easy it is for individuals to share what they feel, their worries and their fears in relation to the organisation, with their peer group, with their leaders. In and of itself, this might not seem that important, but these things happen every day in every aspect of our life, and especially in the working environment. But we don't have those opportunities to do that as easily in working from home. Now, it might seem that some of these factors are at the fluffy end of the spectrum. And having worked with a lot of very high profile athletes, very high profile leaders in sport, and very driven business leaders, their consideration for psychological factors can often get lost unless it is linked to performance. And what we found over the last 20 years working with some of the most elite teams in sport is that it had the biggest single correlation to performance of all the sort of metrics we looked at that weren't physical. So what I mean by that is that psychological bond between groups over and over again was the dominant metric in performance delivery. And right now it's one of the most important areas, because with furloughing, with people working in disparate teams, some teams are going to be well connected and others are not. You've suddenly got a mixed experience, and that sort of sense of shared purpose and shared fate can go out the window. So if I just turn over now to Henry. Henry has had a life-changing accident at the age of 17, as Wendy highlighted earlier, that totally shifted his life and shifted his sense of future and challenged him in unimaginable ways. And I'm going to turn over to Henry for him just to talk through his story, and then I'm going to relate this back to social cohesion in a second. So Henry, over to you.
Thank you, cheers. So back in 2009, I was on holiday with just a group of mates celebrating the end of our AS exams. And fifth day of a holiday, we were down in Portugal at the time. We were just playing around on the beach, chucking a rugby ball around, just kind of got hot, so I decided to run into the sea and to cool off. But as I've run in, I've just misjudged the dive, and where I thought the seabed would continue to dip and get deeper, I just went straight headfirst into a sandbank, basically. And from that moment, yeah, completely everything changed. I found out that I'd dislocated the fourth vertebrae in my neck, severely crushing the spinal cord, almost to a point of severing it. And yeah, from that moment, unable to move anything. At that point, I couldn't move anything from my neck down. And then I was airlifted to hospital in Lisbon, where I spent 2.5, 3 weeks there. Had 2 major operations on my neck. I had pneumonia, MRSA, had pacemaker because I had heart issues. Heart kept stopping. So just going through a lot of that points. Came back to England. I was on a ventilator at that point as well, unable to breathe for myself. And I came back to England where I was 2 weeks in intensive care. And then that was when family really started to become a huge part of everything that was happening. Mum and Dad were with me in Portugal at the time, every single day. And I came back to England, and the boys, my brothers, 3 brothers came and saw me. And then spent, from that point, it was 3 weeks in intensive care. Then 6 months more in hospital at that point, just trying to get as fit and healthy as possible, kind of adapting to the new situation, and I guess kind of learning a completely new way of life. Yeah, physically a new way of life, but kind of with friends and family, it was exactly the same. We were all on that kind of journey together from day one, really. And since then, I've just been trying to kind of get on with my life and try new things and try new opportunities, and which has brought me kind of round to these times where I'm painting, I'm writing, I'm doing all kinds of things that I never ever thought I'd be doing. And it's kind of funny how it all works out in the end, but kind of for me it has.
So just wanted to focus in on that sort of psychological journey in there. I think most of the people on the call will have no ability, including myself, to understand the physical sort of pain and journey, but perhaps can understand some of the psychological journey you went on. We often used to talk in sports teams about the sort of a 3-stage process of accepting, adapting, and then thriving to what was going on in front of you and what you were experiencing in your life. So whether that was in the short term or whether that was in a sort of the long term, could you say a few words perhaps around the sort of, as you saw it, those psychological phases that you went through from the accident through to sort of thriving now?
Yeah, I mean, at the start, it was kind of mentally really, it was brutal. But I was on a lot of medication at times, so I wasn't really kind of taking what was happening. Then I guess it wasn't until maybe I've been back in England for a month or so, and I was thinking a lot clearer. But in the back of my mind, I always had this kind of seed of doubt that come the end of it, I'll be fine, I'll be walking out of hospital. That kind of denial in my head sat there until I just had one really, really horrible day in hospital. I was put into a wheelchair for the first time. And I was taken around, we're taken outside because it was kind of late summer, it's still warm. And then it was only about to come in, I saw my reflection for the first time in 2 months. And I mean, didn't recognise I'd lost 4 stone at that point. I was just so thin. I was still on the ventilator, so I had the tracheotomy in my throat. And then I just had this big bulk wheelchair. I couldn't even support my own head really at the time. And then that day I just lost it. I just completely broke down. And I just cried all day basically. And that was the first day I really started to kind of question the why me. I'd never really thought of it to that point. And yeah, I was just kind of there, wanted to be able to hug my mum. I couldn't do that. Brothers came and saw me. I cried. Dad saw me. He was always the last one to leave at night. And then I just stayed up all night, just crying. And it was only that night that I kind of think I just felt everything I needed to feel. I just released all this kind of stuff that had obviously been building for a couple months. And then I was just lying in bed and I just generally just thought to myself, why do I have no reason to feel this way? I may as well just get on with it. There's no point in me feeling sad, angry. And then from that moment, I just completely switched my mindset into just rather than dwelling on what's happened, just accepting it, moving on, and focusing on all the things that I was able to do, and try and push myself physically. I always enjoyed pushing myself physically before, so I was looking at new ways of doing that. And yes, it was different, but at the same time, exactly the same challenge, just on a different level. And that was just the mindset I just carried through then, and I've always tried to stick with now.
So you mentioned the sort of that evening in the hospital and the sort of going through the range of emotions that sort of took you to a point of perhaps acceptance, and then the process of adapting. What kind of things did you put your energy into once you came out of hospital?
Well, from that night, it was always just about the physical for me. It was about setting myself, it was just tiny little goals for me that I knew each goal I set was achievable. I knew it was a step forward, even though it was minuscule. But for me, it's about setting those goals and just knowing I can reach them. But when I reached it, recognizing that and kind of saying to myself, kind of, well done, you've done it. Now the next one, now the next one. So when I was in hospital, my main goal wasn't about getting out of hospital. I went right back to me being on the ventilator and trying to get rid of that and learn how to breathe again, basically. And it was about spending 5 minutes each day off the ventilator. Then the next day was 10 minutes, the next day was 15 minutes. And these are such kind of tiny little fractions of a whole day. But that was just my focus. And each day, if I got 5 minutes more, then great, fantastic. Next day, I'd try and do more. And just telling myself, like, it's good. Like, kind of feel a bit of pride. Like, those are things that make you feel good. That's what kind of makes your mindset kind of focus more on what made me feel happier.
Was that an approach you'd taken before the accident? Were you like that normally?
No, yeah, of course.
Will's frantically shaking his head.
No, not at all. It was always, I mean, I was a very negative person. I think, well, not I think, I was a negative person before the accident. I never had that focus, had that drive. But it was always going into situations, thinking about the worst thing, the worst outcome over everything, and always giving myself a reason not to do it. Even though I was very lucky that I had opportunities to do stuff, and there are times I should have made more of it and should have taken kind of the chances when I had them. But it was about always finding an excuse for me, about finding a way out. So it was a complete reversal of my mindset at that point.
And just because I don't know how familiar all of the people on this call will be with your journey, talk us a little through the sort of mouth painting and where that's taken you. Because I happened to see a few talk show appearances. I didn't realise how famous you were.
Yeah, the boys completely riding my coattails at this point.
Very unashamedly as well.
So yeah, I mean the art started back. It started January 2015, and I had a pressure sore on my back, which is kind of one of the things that is quite common with spinal cord injuries. The skin becomes more vulnerable, so I had to stay in bed for a few weeks, and I was kind of having to air it and spend a lot of time lying on my side and not doing anything really. In times I was able to sit up, I was able to put on my iPad, and I control the iPad same way I paint with a mouth stick, and I touched the screen, and I just started to start with this really basic drawing app, and it was, I mean, the drawings weren't much at all, but I really enjoyed it. It was this kind of new, I guess, bit of freedom that I had, and it kind of gave me something to do at the time. But then the more I did it, the more I was enjoying it, the more kind of saw myself getting better at it. And then when I was able to get out of bed, I moved on to using actual pencils, and then a couple months after that, with that painting. And yeah, it's kind of nearly 5.5 years now, so it's kind of gone a bit wild. It's kind of allowed me to do stuff I never thought I'd do, and again, just these opportunities that I never thought I'd have, and just trying to make the most of it all.
So you're obviously far too humble to say anything about this, but perhaps you could just make reference to some of the sort of talk shows and the J.K. Rowling stuff, because I think there's some sort of funny aspects that you've probably experienced there. Yeah,
I mean, I've kind of off the back of public speaking, the art and things, I was very kind of given the opportunity to write a book. So that came out in September 2017. And off the back of that, I was obviously had to get out and sell wherever anyone would take me. And I was very lucky to be invited onto the Jonathan Ross show. Had this kind of really mad, crazy, weird night that kind of still have to kind of metaphorically pinch myself as to like, did that really happen? It's still weird to say I was on it. I don't think the guests kind of expected me to, I don't think anyone was kind of expecting me to be on it. I think the other guests thought it was a bit of a shock. I think when I was taken to the green room, I think they thought I'd won some kind of competition or something. But yeah, I mean, it's just been, it was just the opportunities I've had, obviously nothing ever, kind of more than I ever dreamed of, nothing that I didn't kind of want to do any of these things. I've just been very lucky that they've just kind of happened to me.
So that sense of thriving you can see in the motivational speaking and in the mouth painting. Perhaps it'd be useful to bring Will in here as your brother, but also as a high-profile sports person. What was your sense of the relationships within the family? Did you feel they changed as a result of the accident, or did it bring out anything different?
Yeah, it's. I suppose it's one of these ones when you look back on it, kind of 10 years down the line now, you actually see things a lot clearer than when they were going on at the time. So I think we were very lucky as kids. We had an unbelievable upbringing. We've got fantastic parents. We had a brilliant childhood. So we're always quite close as kind of four brothers and a family of six anyway. But what happened to H, in hindsight, ironically, actually made us a lot closer. And I don't think we necessarily felt that happening as it was happening. When you look back and how we all are now, I think we weirdly had a really positive, obviously a very negative impact to begin with, and that whole accepting the situation and all the rest of it is, we kind of on a much lesser scale had to go through a very similar process in a different context to H. But when you look back on it now and how we are and what H has been able to do and kind of as how we've been able to deal with it as a family, I think it's massively changed us, but for the better, in terms of, I think we all have a very different subconscious outlook on life, and the way we react to certain situations now and this and the other, I think it's definitely been molded by what we've been through. But then I think that's a very natural reaction. You're a product of your experiences and your environments, and we went through something that very few people, touch wood, will go through, and so naturally off the back of it, it's going to change you for better or for worse. And I think fortunately for us, through kind of following Henry's kind of leadership in a way and how he dealt with it, thankfully for us, I think it actually had quite a big positive impact on all of us.
I'm just interested in the sort of the wider community, because we'll return to the community a bit later on in today's talk. But what was the sort of reaction of the wider community, and did that surprise you, or was that expected?
Well, initially, because H was obviously in Portugal when he did it, and he was in Lisbon basically H was essentially abroad for the best part of a month, if not maybe a little bit longer, with the actual holiday itself and then the accident and hospital time. So and then mum and dad flew out for 3 weeks of that. So it was my older brother and myself, and my younger brother was away at the time. Youngest brother was away at the time. So it was Tom, our oldest brother, and myself at home alone. And I was first year out of school. Tom was kind of going to university. So we were useless at cooking and all the things you need to be good at when you're on your own. So the initial reaction was a lot of family members and mum and dad's friends and people that knew the family, literally not knocking on the door, not wanting to disturb us, but leaving piles of food on our front porch, just piles of this stuff. So knowing that Tom and I were two, young men that were probably going to be useless at all this stuff, and so that initial reaction was actually very humbling and kind of overwhelming. These people just went out of their way through no other reason for them to want to help us. And then initially, as it the news broke and it got into kind of the rugby circles and got out there a little bit more, I think H would agree, the reaction to it has been unbelievable. Even now you see when H goes to some of his dinners and the Matt Hampson Foundation stuff that H is involved in, and you see the reaction and what people are prepared to give to these causes, how people react when they see H. There was I think it was one of your last art exhibition, and a lady came up to him and just broke down crying right in front of him because she was so overwhelmed by meeting him. And I'm sitting next to him as an older brother going, I think you're crying at the wrong brother here. I don't
Will goes for him.
Yeah. But when you see those and that's an extreme reaction, but that's the impact that H has had on and I'm kind of talking for him here, but he gets messages from people all over the world saying, how inspired they are by his story and what he's been able to do. And and I don't think that will ever change. I think we'll always be overwhelmed and humbled and in awe of the reaction, mainly because we knew what Henry was like before the accident. So I think we all struggle to still wrap our heads around how he's such a decent bloke now.
Sorry, go on, Henry.
I just said a lot has changed.
Yeah.
They still can't accept it. Yeah, they need to accept and adapt.
There's a process for that,
Yeah, exactly. We're not quite in the thriving with it yet, but we're getting there.
And just in terms of the art, before I come back to sort of relationships and social cohesion, where can people get hold of your art, or can they, Henry? Is it for sale, or?
I have my website, henryfraserart.com.
It's in the chat. I've popped it in the chat, along with a link to where they can buy your book, Henry. on Amazon.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, it's an inspiring story, and I guess the reason we wanted to focus on it here and how it's relevant to social cohesion is that the sort of relationships, community, and the sense of sort of shared purpose can be pulled together through a very traumatic experience. And whilst the trauma that you've experienced, Henry, is in no way similar to or same as the coronavirus experience, there are some minor parallels in your story, both in terms of your psychological processing of the experience, but also in terms of the way relationships hold a group together and make it perform. And in this instance, it's your physical performance, it's your well-being that's impacted. But when we come back around to social cohesion in business, it's a slightly different performance metric that's being used there, but it's still the same principle, I think, at its core. So just last couple of questions for you, Will and Henry, before we move on to the next slide. What would you say is the most... Oh, sorry, Wendy.
A couple of questions on the Q&A. So if anyone else wants to pop a question in the Q&A, do. I think this one is probably for Will and Henry. It's, what does the word team mean to you, and how do you think your life experiences would have been different without the support from all the teams of people around you?
Do you want to go first, H?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like Will said, been very lucky. I was very lucky. The team around me were, and still are, they're awesome. I've never at any point had to kind of ask them to be there. They've always just been there, which has allowed me to kind of focus on things I need to focus on to kind of be better and get better and do the things I want to do. And that support from day one was huge for me. When I was in hospital, I was having groups of friends drive up every day from southeast London, the whole way across London out to Aylesbury, or get the train after school and just to spend a couple hours with me. And that was great because it allowed me to kind of think about a normal life again, and allowed me to then focus on just getting better, not think about other things, and allowed me to just be clear with my mind. And it was the same with the family. I mean, Mum was there all day with me, but during the day, Will after training would come, we'd spend ages together, and Dom after school, and Tom would drive home on the weekends back from uni, and having that group around me was amazing. It helped me kind of in ways that it's kind of hard to explain how much it helped me, but it allowed me to be here now and do the things I'm doing.
Yeah, and I suppose obviously the one team we have well, actually we have both teams in common, really, but the family stuff obviously is amazing. Then if I talk from the more the sport angle, I think like in life, you learn a lot more about yourself and a lot more about the people around you in adversity and in times of need. And sticking with Henry and H's story, when that happened, obviously I was in my first year of being a professional rugby player. I was in the academy, kind of trying to make my way in professional sport, and the way the club rallied around me individually firstly, and then the family off the back of it. H opened Allianz Park when he came down. They've raised money. They've my dad's more of a Saracens player, I think, than I ever was, in terms of he's at every game, second team games. If he could, he'd be at every training session watching. But they just embraced the whole thing. And I think having people around you that whatever happens, you can fall back on, or people around you don't even need to go to them. They'll come to you before you even kind of had the opportunity to think, I need to speak to someone, or I need to, just people that know you so well, they know when you're off or when you're on, or they know how to react to you in certain situations. So I think the teams in whatever context, I think have had a monumental impact on our life as an entire family, to be honest. And there's no denying that the experience has probably shaped that somewhat, of course. But I'd like to think, and this is entirely hypothetical, you'd like to think that even without that, our family would still be the same as it is now, that the club would still have taken me in and taken the family in the same way that it did. But obviously we'll never know the true answer to that. But yeah, teams I think have been huge for both of us and the entire family.
Out of interest, because we're going to move on to sort of measuring relationships in a second, what impact did that have on you, Will, at Saracens, and how you played the game and your sort of commitment to the club, the way they reacted to H's experience?
So again, when I was playing, I didn't really think of it like that. Like and how I'm going to describe it, it's only since moving into the real world and more in this line of work that I've really kind of been able to articulate it. But when someone shows you that they genuinely care or that they genuinely value you as a person, very naturally your levels of discretionary effort off the back of it go up tenfold, because that's your way of giving back. That's your way. So we did a lot of kind of work at the club around, understanding why people are in the job they're in. Why do you want to play professional rugby? And a lot of people talk about families and this, that, and the other. And when it came around to me, I kind of said, well, to be honest, what I do on the pitch, what I do at the club, yes, it's obviously for me what I want to do, but a huge chunk of it is me essentially trying to give back and trying to say thank you. So I can't say thank you enough to my close mates at the club, the management, the loyalty they've shown me. There wasn't enough words in the dictionary to really demonstrate how I truly felt. So the only way I could do it was by doing everything I could on the pitch in the training sessions to make sure I played as well as I could. So therefore the team would play as well as they could, type thing. So it's huge. I would never have played for another club. That's assuming that Sarries would always have kept me on. If they'd let me go, then that's different. But I would never voluntarily have left the club ever because of all this stuff. I think the bond becomes a lot deeper than just financial, than just winning or losing, or just success. And when the work we've done, Christian, when you take it into businesses, if you can just take a smidgen of that emotional connection to the work that you're doing, or the people you work with, or the actual bigger picture of the organisation, your levels of churn in the business will fall dramatically. The discretionary effort from your employees will increase massively. And you've not actually done a huge amount to get there. All you've done is actually just genuinely, authentically value and care about people. And I think but that takes time. That you've got to build it. But I think it's a massive part of my experience as a rugby player with the club, for sure.
How are we doing on questions?
So we've got another one, which I think is for you, which is, are there examples of businesses that have had a strong social cohesion and over time lost it? Can you measure it and use these findings to strengthen it again and improve company performance? Which I guess some of which you're going to come on to in the slides.
Probably a good point to jump to the next slide, and we can link back to cohesion and one of its relatable metrics, social capital, go back sort of 20 plus years. And the first time I came across it was in sport, in cycling, in GB cycling, when the management group that preceded Dave Brailsford was looking to measure every sort of psychological factor they could that impacted performance. And so we had to filter through a lot of different pieces of data and noise that really were common measurement points but didn't really have any correlation to performance. But one that kept coming back around was relationships, and that sense of shared purpose and shared goals. And I think in business and in most of the sporting teams I've worked in, most leaders would say the sense of shared purpose and shared goals and everyone moving in the same direction is one of the critical factors within the organisation and within delivering performance. The problem was always, how do you measure it? So we started looking at how a range of different psychometrics that we could use to measure social capital and social cohesion that got refined over time. And I think I can remember the first time Will and I met, I don't know, years and years and years ago, when we were talking about social capital and social cohesion. And he, probably at the time, not knowing the background of my world, said it was not possible to measure. It was a feeling, it was an emotion. And I can vividly remember saying, well, how do you measure that feeling or emotion within Saracens? Because it's obviously a very strong factor in how you perform. And I think at the time you said, well, it was to do with... What, sorry?
Well, I said we don't. You just walk in and you get a feeling.
You get feelings in the canteen on a Monday, and if it's really noisy in the canteen, social capital scores are good. Yeah. So, unfortunately for my nerdy brain that doesn't really work. So we needed metrics and numbers and ways of measuring that could be validated. So we started looking at people's relationship and their feeling towards their role. So that's job capital, their sense of psychological safety, so how freely they could communicate their ideas and feelings, the social capital, so how easy and the depth, how easy it is for individuals to communicate to their peer group, and the depth of those communications. Are they just talking about functional work things, or if in a time of crisis and difficulty, would you share the details on something outside of your work life with a colleague? And we came up with scales and a way of measuring different depths of social capital. Again, with leadership capital, how emotionally invested you feel in your management group, and then organizational capital, how much pride you take in the organization that you belong to, and that sense of community within the organization that we talked about earlier. So over a sort of 15-20 year period, we developed ways of measuring all of these factors, and most importantly, they were not just fluffy feeling-based things, they were things that statistically impacted performance. And every single sporting team that we've been involved with has measured them, and I think some of the correlations are quite startling. Within, I think, Saracens, their social capital scores would precede their performance on the pitch. So if they had a good week or two of social capital scores, you'd see the performance uplift at the next game. Obviously, we're working in correlations here and not causality, but it would happen over and over again, enough for us to feel the validity of what we were doing here. So when we relate that to now, never is it more important to be looking and measuring relationships. You've got huge change, a lot of difference in experience across teams, everybody working remotely, so a change in the way that we communicate. So right now we would expect to see changes in social capital scores. We're seeing in the businesses we work with, the distributions are changing. So whereas an organization may have had a consistent score around sort of 60 or 70%, and so that would represent a big part of the social cohesion score, now we're seeing changes whereby certain teams, especially teams which might be more introverted. So if I was to pick on a team just for the sake of example, an IT team, you can see real drops in social capital because the communication and strength of relationships, perhaps relating to introverted practices, aren't necessarily there. It's a much more individually orientated role. So we're seeing big drops in distribution of social capital scores. We measure pride in the organisation and employee net promoter scores, which heavily correlate, and these are sort of the big three that correlate to performance. So psychological safety is quite often correlated with innovation, and you're going to need that as you try to work through changes in your operating model and your changes in your operating approach. Social capital scores we call in business the emotional scaffolding for the business. So whenever there is change, whether that's organisational design, furloughing, change of operating approach, those emotional capital scores or social capital scores, that scaffolding holds the business together. And it's very easy to overlook that, but if you can measure it, you can start to notice the correlation in your business with performance. So
that's me. So last week we conducted a survey specifically around how people are feeling about suddenly working from home more, and around the social cohesion and team cohesion. I think a few people that took that survey are probably on this session, so thank you very much, guys, for those of you that took part. 34% of people who took that assessment reported feeling lower this month than they did last month, and those experiencing more lows also experienced an increased level of boredom, less shared values with their team, they speak less with their team, and they have less buy-in into their organisation. Those with the higher mood scores had experienced better organisational communication and more team cohesiveness. At this point in the kind of cycle of what we're going through with coronavirus and COVID-19, it's too early to say that one's causing the other, but there does appear to be a correlation between the two at the moment. So the big question is, what can we do about it? How can you help a remote team, and how can you manage a remote team?
So some of the things we're going to suggest here are available on the internet, or you may already be doing. So some of the things might be common ground already, but we just wanted to have some practical tips here before we get into the depth of the measurement. So regular day check-ins, one-on-one or face-to-face via video. The importance of seeing colleagues when you're communicating I guess will be highlighted the most on this call. But the team needs to see you and you need to see them. Setting a clear agenda for each daily check-in and feedback, discussions on feedback and resources that team members need.
You should also be over communicating, so lots and lots of regular communication with team, because loneliness and isolation can affect lots of people who aren't used to working in a remote environment, and especially considering current social distancing measures, people aren't seeing their friends and family as regularly as they were, or they're seeing the people that they live with probably or potentially more regularly than they want to.
Make the most of tech. Make the most of tech. So I think most organisations have now adapted to using video calls. But it's the bigger part is the connectedness and engagement on the call. So looking for signs that individuals aren't present. We certainly within our organisation have encouraged people actually being on the video call rather than dropping out and just having audio join to the calls. You don't get the same sense of connectedness. There's a range of online collaboration tools, which I'm sure everyone is now across, and looking at different communication options.
It's also really important to manage expectations and create realistic expectations for teams work. So lots of people are trying to work from home and manage all their childcare responsibilities. As we all know, kids are at home now. People are trying to homeschool and work from home at the same time. Perhaps working hours and working patterns are slightly different, but you can set yourself and the team up for success by clearly managing those expectations, communicating them and explaining what you want people to do and why, and when you need it done by. But also help your team by understanding how you're measuring success. So is your success measured by completion of a task? Is it measured by it being done in a particular time scale? Just making sure that people understand what they're being asked to do, why, and when it needs to be done by.
Checking on resources. So making sure the team has the technology to get the work done. Also reviewing processes which might be outdated now that people are remote working. Understanding where information is kept and who has access to it. We've had a lot of discussions about single points of failure, where if somebody's not on a call or not available, suddenly the whole process jams to a halt. So looking at whether your processes are fit for purpose.
Being flexible. So again, in line with that managing expectations piece, what does productivity really mean given the current health crisis? Regular working hours aren't always efficient for people because they're trying to homeschool during the day. So I know that my working pattern has changed slightly so that I finish work slightly earlier but then pick it up again after my children have gone to bed. But also trust your team and give them the freedom and flexibility to get work done on the schedule that's most productive for them. If you don't trust them, they're not going to trust in you. You have to have that two-way trust going on. And
making time for team building. I mean, when we talked earlier about the connectedness of teams and the ability to download, and relating back to Henry's story of the sort of process of downloading and coming to terms with what he was experiencing, that sort of goes away in remote working, and it's very easy for that to get lost. The coffee shop moment, if you like, where you can just turn to somebody nearby and share your experience. So making excuses for those to happen, really, so that communication can still happen, that connectedness can still occur.
Most important of all of those is knowing your team. So knowing their drivers, their areas of interest outside of work, giving them that encouragement and emotional support that they need. And if you're not sure, ask them for feedback. Ask teams, ask colleagues, ask anyone that you need to ask for feedback. I think Will probably highlighted it when he talked about knowing your team being important. When Henry was in hospital in Portugal and his parents were there, the thing that Will and his older brother needed most was food, because they couldn't do that. And the people that helped them knew their audience, knew their team, and provided that. And that's all you need to do. Sometimes people don't want to do virtual quizzes or have pub lunches. It's about knowing the people that are in your team and that you're working with and providing the best for them.
So I've been incredibly fortunate, as has probably Will, to have worked with a range of high-performing teams. And what I have noticed is no coincidence, that sense of collaboration, shared purpose, everyone pointing in the same direction, as Ron Dennis used to say at McLaren, is perhaps the hardest thing to achieve, but also the simplest thing to say. So measurement and being able to measure the relationships and the sense of shared goals, I would suggest, is critical more than ever now.
So we want to give something back as an organisation, and we're delighted to be able to offer a free 8-week programme to review an organisation's social cohesion for up to 10 companies. The intention is that we'll help you measure your team's sense of values, their psychological safety, their social capital, and the survey will also give insight into their productivity and performance. We haven't done this before for free, certainly not. It's part of our normal offering, but if you're interested in taking us up on this offer, drop me an email. It's w.kilgannon@mypeoplegroup.com. Drop something in the chat and I will contact you after the webinar. So I'm just going to stop sharing the slides and see if we have any other questions for the boys before we let them go. We've got another one. A lot of the tips for successful remote teams working rely on senior people having emotional intelligence. How do we help accelerate this skill and capability for those whom logic is the primary approach?
You want to take that on?
Take that one, Will.
I think the thing is, it's one of these ones where emotional intelligence is an interesting kind of phrase in the sense that a lot of the time if we assume someone has little emotional intelligence, we ourselves are less likely to engage and interact with them because we've formed the assumption that they're not going to interact back. But in many ways, all we do by not interacting with them in the same way is emphasize their low emotional intelligence because we're not having an actual conversation with them. So the reality is, if we take the time ourselves to go and actually understand our leaders or our managers or whoever it is, the people running the business, that in itself will obviously start to break down those issues. If after interactions there's still this kind of barrier or they don't have the EQ that they potentially need, then obviously that's a different conversation that needs to happen, and then there's other decisions to be made. But I think assuming someone has got low, or not assuming, but thinking someone's got low emotional intelligence doesn't mean they necessarily do have low emotional intelligence. A lot of times it means we just don't interact with them enough or in the right way to actually understand who they are. A lot of times in relationships, friendships, colleagues, romantic, whatever it is, just because someone isn't the same as us, we then assume that what they're doing is wrong. Or just because someone doesn't have the same level of EQ that we have, we assume they don't have enough. But actually theirs just manifests itself in a different way. So it's this whole thing of, yes, we want people to understand us and trust us and know us as much as they possibly can, but we also have to be able to know them and trust them and understand them as much as we can as well. So I think the emphasis is this two-way kind of street where in order for them to have the emotional intelligence to know me, I need to have the emotional intelligence to know them. And I think that's the bit a lot of people potentially forget in corporate and in the business world.
Yeah, I'd just perhaps echo that and add to that. I've worked with a lot of perhaps autocratic leaders who are not that emotionally expressive, other than anger, and who, I'm thinking mainly of sports leaders here, but I'm sure the parallels are there for business as well. And their interest in emotional intelligence and emotions and some of the topics that we've covered today would have been low if it was not for the fact that it was represented, or we were representing the information to them in a way they could understand, i.e. this impacts performance. So once the discussion shifted from being around perhaps what they would have seen as fluffy dimensions to the fact that this is significant predictor of performance, the interest around emotions became much higher. So I don't know whether I can give a full and final answer to the original question, but I'd say it's about framing the debate, framing the discussion, and starting the discussion.
Thank you. I think the next question is specifically for you, Christian. Have you identified any differences between male and female managers related to social cohesion?
Eggshells.
Obviously the men are far more emotionally intelligent, much more connected as a group. I know. Yes, I think it's nuanced in the sense that it's not as simple as females being better at emotional connection and social cohesion than males. It's more nuanced, where we would see certain characteristics that are more innate perhaps in females than males coming through. Again, I'm now moving into the territory of huge generalization, so always risky, but for the sake of giving an answer, it's more common for an extroverted quality to be in females than males. I think that's statistically proven, and that tends to mean that there's more communication, more likelihood for communication in teams when there is a female running it. That said, there are differences in the way males might approach this, and certainly ages as well. There's certainly, if I think about my father's generation in business and what I'm talking about today, he would think this was absolute garbage. Unfortunately, I've got a lot of stats to back it up, which he wouldn't like, but his generation was very much about not talking about things, not communicating, just get on with it. And, communication was seen as getting in the way of what you're supposed to be doing, getting tasks done. So there's a generational difference. I'd say there are some nuanced male-female differences in social cohesion scores. There's a whole topic there probably for another webinar.
I think that might be another webinar. There's one from Manly, which I'll come back to in a second, Manly, for Henry and Will specifically. But Christian, where or with whom have you experienced the highest level of social cohesion?
Crikey. One of the things that is perhaps most interesting in relation to sports, and this answer is, we have seen huge spikes of social cohesion at certain times in some of the sports teams that I've been involved in, but they're transient. So where there is a huge shared event, like winning a certain amount of medals at the Olympics. So I think in 2012 in London, the GB cycling team got 8 out of 10 of their track cyclists medalled, and the social cohesion scores were through the roof. But they dropped quite quickly once people were back into their individual training cycles. So there are spikes where you see social cohesion numbers really go up, and you have to do a bit of further analysis to see is that connected to specific events, in the same way that with the coronavirus crises, the numbers probably would have plummeted. But again, in probably groups, so it's distributed, it's not evenly plummeted. So yeah, long answer, probably in GB cycling after 2012, certainly with some of the Lions tours, and in England rugby, when the sort of in winning runs, like when Eddie Jones's team went on a 17-18 match winning run, social cohesion numbers were quite high, but it masked secondary problems, which around psychological safety being low, which came out later when they stopped winning. There was some really crappy communication, and they brought in a range of psychologists to improve communication. So even someone who's considered fairly direct, like Eddie Jones, measures social cohesion and communication.
There's a question around, I think it's in response to the question about differences in social cohesion between genders, around, is it not personality that plays much more of an impact in the differences with emotional intelligence?
Yeah, it certainly impacts emotional intelligence. I'm slightly wary to go too far into that one, because there's a lot of interpretation that can occur when we start talking about personalities and different personality styles, and there's a lot of in sort of embedded definitions of emotional intelligence. I reckon if we went around the room and asked, what does emotional intelligence mean to you, everyone would have a slightly different answer. So yes, personality for sure impacts individuals and emotional intelligence.
And there's a question here about coaching. So what key interventions would you recommend to help corporate teams who have low social cohesion, and in particular, has coaching shown positive results?
Is that me again?
Well, I'd say,
I think that's
Will, maybe.
A lot of the work I do now, having finished playing rugby, is around kind of taking in particular the social cohesion stuff we've done at Saracens into the corporate world. And actually taking sales teams, leadership teams, C-suite, whatever it is, through kind of similar stuff we did. And the answer actually is incredibly simple. It's quite nuanced in how you go about doing it, but the simple answer is making a conscious effort to actually go and have a conversation with someone. It's very easy to send an email. It's very easy to go on a WhatsApp group and all this kind of stuff. But one of the big kind of shocks to me when I came out of playing professional sport and working into an office was people would send an email to someone that was sat in the same room. rather than get up and go and talk to them, thinking that actually they were communicating really well. And in terms of cohesion, the fastest way in any relationship, whatever context, the quickest way to grow a relationship is by being vulnerable, is showing vulnerability. I think there's various bits of research done on it, but it's also the most difficult way. So if you're in a leadership position, if you can show any form of vulnerability, as big or as little as just putting your hands up when you've made a little mistake, as big as actually, sharing something quite personal, that is the quickest way to build a relationship with someone else and build trust. And then off the back of that, you build the cohesion when it comes back to working together. So there's no kind of secret sauce to how you do it. There's no kind of magic to it. It's very simply having conversations. What we do a lot at the club is actually, you have to build it into your working days. So it's one of these ones where cohesion is like, it's like physical training. So if I want to get stronger, I'll go work out more in the gym. If I want to get fitter, I'll go run more on the pitch. If I want to build cohesion with someone else and build a relationship, I have to work at it. I have to actually allocate and give time permission to talk about it. The second I stop working out the gym, I become weaker. The second I stop running on the pitch, I start to become more unfit. The second I stop building cohesion and talking about relationships, they start to become worse. And I think it's that mindset, and it's a long-term play. The rewards you get from cohesion aren't instant. They're not immediate. You're not suddenly going to get these huge returns and commercially go like this because you started doing these things. It's something that might be 6 months, a year, 2 years down the line. But if you do it, when you get to that point, you're in a much more sustainable position than you would have been had you just carried on in that same trajectory. So what we do at the club is we build into team meetings these social capital exercises, which is dead simple. The coaches will put 10 questions up on the board before our team meeting where we're talking tactics and the rest of it. And those questions are absolutely bugger all to do with rugby. It'll be things like, were you in a band when you were a kid? Who did you admire growing up? What's your biggest fear? What's the best bit of advice you've ever been given? All these questions where you're trying to dig beneath the skin and unearth who the person is. And literally you do it for 10 minutes, that's it, on kind of round table things. We don't share with everyone else, you share with your table, then go, right, everyone happy, done, cool, now we'll start talking about rugby. And actually what that does is open you up, and you keep doing that. And it is a bit of forced fun. And I'll be honest, I was one of the ones at the club that when it initially got brought in said, are you kidding? Like, we're adults, we're not kids. Because initially they bought these dice, on each side of the dice there's a different question. And we were there going, this is ridiculous. Why are we doing this? But what happens is you roll the dice, there's a question, and the person that answers the question, this happened to me. There's a guy who I consider one of my closest mates at the club. And the question was, what's your biggest fear? And he came up with this answer that I had no idea. I didn't even know it was a factor for him. And I'm going, Christ, I'm meant to know this guy pretty well, and I had no idea. And then you want to find out, and you want to start having these, and it becomes a very natural, organic process. So yes, that's quite a long-winded answer, but essentially it's simple. It's consciously going out of your way to have a conversation, a non-work related conversation with people.
Maybe just add 30 seconds to that, Wendy. One of the things I think is most impressive about Saracens, is somebody who's been in and around sport for a while, and mainly on the data side and performance analysis side, is Saracens have this, I don't know whether it's a motto, or mission statement, making memories.
Yeah.
And that's a fantastic embodiment of the idea of shared experience, that when this is all done, when everyone's career is when they're no longer playing rugby and their careers are over, it's the memories that will be treasured. And so, yes, the winning and the trophies are part of that, but more important is the memories you guys make together as a group. And it was the first time I think that I've seen it explicitly stated as a mission statement, as a reason for us all being here. And for me, fantastic, because the focus that gives you as a group on each other and the connectedness that then manifests itself as performance. I think it's and I think what's interesting us at the moment is with, not even, obviously it's hugely tested with everything, the coronavirus and the rest of it, but even before that, with, I'm sure people on the call will know about the salary cap stuff that's gone on earlier on in the year. That now is the biggest test and challenge to everything I've just spoken about, and everything we put in at the club. And actually, this is the true marker of actually how
how deep are the levels of social capital within the group? Like all this cohesion stuff that's given us success, how deep is it? Because if it gets us through all this, then, you know, clearly it's authentic. If it doesn't, then, so it's a really interesting time for us now to actually, you know, go back to this stuff even more. You know, in times of need, this is what we have to refer back to. We need to get to know each other even better, keep building these relationships, because they're the things that actually pull us through these darker periods. And going back to this whole webinar with all of this, at the end of the day, it's the relationships that get people through this, that stop the loneliness, that stop the, so it's a huge part of life in general, let alone just business or sport.
So I'm really conscious of time, guys. It's 2 minutes past 3. Adam's asked a follow-up question on, which I think actually, Will, you've already covered some of it, but how can we help to recover drops in social cohesion where a particular goal has been achieved or an event passed, for example, London 2012, or how can we stop that drop-off before it happens?
Most of the leaders that I know that have been very good at that are relentless. The focus shifts very quickly, and the celebration of the achievement shifts very quickly onto the next achievement and the next goal. And whilst I'm not an expert in sort of goal setting, most of the great leaders that I've been fortunate enough to work with have outlined the next shared purpose, the next goal very quickly, and articulated it and communicated it and socialized it. And it's there's never been a sense of sitting still. So whilst there could be sort of social cohesion drops related to, oh God, not again, and whilst you have to be sensitive to people's recovery and different needs for celebration, because many times in my own career I've been accused of sort of being slightly robotic about anything that's been achieved. It's straight on to the next thing. That is a big part of keeping social cohesion and keeping focus.
Perfect. And the last question was for Henry and Will. Manly's just removed it. I think he's just dropped off, but it says, Henry and Will, can you come and talk to the businesses, some of the businesses that I'm talking to at the moment, remotely, of course.
For a huge cost, yes.
Thanks very much, guys. It is 3 minutes past, so I'm going to let everyone drop off the call because we've taken up all the time. But thank you very much. Really appreciate it. For the attendees on the call, if anyone does have any outstanding questions, my contact details are in all the emails from the Zoom. Yes, Adam, the webinar is going to be available after today. It has been recorded, so we will send the webinar out to you on an email. But if you do have any further questions, drop them to me on an email and I will get them answered for you. Or indeed, if you want to talk to us about the offer that we're putting out there around the social cohesion survey, drop me an email and we can have a conversation. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all. Cheers, Henry. Cheers, Henry. Will.
Cheers, guys.